We start with Roger Stone, the legendary American political consultant, both famous and infamous, the strategist who played a key role in the elections of Presidents Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, and George H.W. Bush, and he also was instrumental in the 2000 Florida recount, responsible for the election of George W. Bush. His book is called The Man Who Killed Kennedy, The Case Against LBJ. Good morning, Roger Stone.
Jim, great to be with you.
Good to talk with you. Why do you think the 36th American president had something to do with the death of his predecessor?
Well, because I think he had unique means, motive, and opportunity. First of all, I think it's important to establish Johnson was a murderer. He is responsible, in my opinion, for as many as 8 political murders prior to JFK. Murders to cover up corruption, which was of epic proportions, just biblical proportions, and murders to cover up vote theft. He stole his first election for the United States Senate, and he was desperate to cover that up. A man of enormous ambition and enormous greed. He was facing political oblivion. He had blackmailed his way onto the ticket to begin with, using stuff from his friend J. Edgar Hoover's secret files. Hoover was the FBI director, gave him sexual dirt on Kennedy, which Johnson held over his head to shoot his way onto the ticket. And in the fall of November 1963, he was looking at political oblivion and jail because of he'd become ensnared in 2 major corruption scandals, that of Senate Secretary Bobby Baker, Johnson's bagman, who passed millions in bribes to the senator and the vice president, and also Billy Sal Estes, a flamboyant wheeler-dealer Texas con man who has defrauded the U.S. government for millions and kicked back to Johnson. So Johnson is facing the prospect not only of political embarrassment, being dumped, but prosecution in jail at the hands of his nemesis, Robert Kennedy, as Attorney General. And therefore he is a very desperate man. We're not talking about a rational man. We're talking about an amoral psychopath here. This is someone who is crude, vulgar, vindictive, an abuser of alcohol, an abuser of women, an abuser of animals. This is somebody who's exceedingly, he's a manic depressive. He goes from deep depressions to wild outbursts of temper. He's a sadist. This is a man who, as president, conducts meetings while sitting on the toilet defecating to humiliate his aides, simply for the purpose of enjoying their discomfort. This is a sick individual. I think that's important to understand that portion of the portrait, but it was the only way to survive. And he has willing plotters here. The CIA, for whom he's been the major appropriator of cash as the Senate Majority Leader, is furious with JFK over his failure in the Bay of Pigs, and they and the military are upset about the fact that in his negotiations in the Cuban Missile Crisis, he has secretly given away missiles, U.S. strategically placed missiles in Turkey and Italy, shifting the balance of power in Europe. So the American people aren't told that for 40 years. We're told that he faced the Russians down. We didn't know he made a secret deal that was kept from the American people. America came out weaker. Bill Moyers himself says Johnson was a very, very sick man. George Reedy said that he was a monster. George Reedy, his press secretary, compared him to Stalin and Hitler. Bobby Kennedy called him an animal. Richard Nixon called him an animal. Eleanor Roosevelt called him an animal.
What did Nixon think about who did it?
Nixon came to believe that Johnson did it. Initially, he believed what J. Edgar Hoover told him, that it was Oswald acting alone, but his mind would change when he recognized Jack Ruby as an associate of Lyndon Johnson's. Nixon correctly remembered that he had met Ruby as early as 1947, when Murray Schotner, who was himself a mob lawyer, but later Nixon's kind of political eminence Greece, brought Ruby to Nixon and said that Johnson wants us to hire this guy as an informant on the House committee. We've got some extra staff cash. What do you want to do? And Nixon said, hire him. And indeed, the records that we found demonstrate that Jack Rubenstein of Chicago, that's Jack Ruby, was a paid informant for the committee. So at that juncture, I think it explains why you hear Nixon say in the Watergate tapes that the Warren Commission was the greatest hoax ever perpetrated.
You liked Kennedy, didn't you?
There's a lot I liked about him. First of all, he inspired a generation. He was dashing, he was cultured, he was charming, and more importantly, he was positive. He was upbeat. He was optimistic about America's future. He was the last Democrat.
You were 11 years old, I think, when the president
Yes.
was killed. Do you recall that day?
Yeah, I do. I was, remember my classmates were upset. I initially was just in shock, and then it was not until the next day when I saw, or several days later when I saw little John Kennedy, saluting his father's casket, that I actually cried myself. It was a very emotional time. It was where we learned what George Bush was really doing on the day of the assassination. For 30 years, he said he couldn't remember where he was, which is really odd. And then it turns out he was in Dallas the night before. He was in Dallas in that morning. Then he flew to Tyler, Texas. He gave a speech. He made a call to the FBI essentially to establish an alibi as to where he was in the time, only minutes after Kennedy was shot. Then he told the FBI he was flying back to Dallas and would be available at the Sheraton Hotel that night. Yet he doesn't do that. He flies back to Houston instead. It's all very curious. We also get a document there that ties him to the CIA as early as 1963, even though he said in his Senate confirmations in the 70s when he was appointed DCI, Director of Central Intelligence, he'd never worked for the agency previously. So it's curious. I don't make a specific accusation other than to say that he acts in a very, very curious way. There's 4 presidents in Dallas the day of the assassination, 4 men who would be president: Kennedy, Johnson, Nixon, and Bush. That in itself is extraordinary.
And Gerald Ford was on the Warren Commission.
And Gerald Ford was on the Warren Commission, where, at the behest of Hoover, according to the memoirs of 2 of Hoover's top FBI leaders, Duke DeLoach and William Sullivan, the FBI arranges for Ford to alter the autopsy record, in essence, to move the record of a wound from JFK's upper back at the 3rd thoracic as vertebrae, as JFK's military doctor described it in the actual autopsy, to the lower neck to accommodate the throat wound, which we're now going to call an exit wound instead of an entrance wound on the front, and thus abetting the so-called single bullet, 3-bullet, single bullet theory. So Ford is a conspirator too. It's kind of a riddle of history.
Do you think Oswald was involved in any way?
No, I think he's exactly what he says he is. He's a patsy. The CIA's major, although they may have supplied shooters, we don't know that, but I think their major accomplishment is to plant the fall guy and get him positioned. They've gone to great lengths to create this myth that he's a communist, and they have maneuvered him into position. Voice stress analysis, technology that didn't exist in 1963. When you analyze his various comments, such as "I didn't shoot anybody, I'm a patsy," or reporter shouts, "Did you shoot the president?" He says, "No, sir, I did not." Those analyses show that he's telling the truth. He's bewildered. I don't even think he's on the 6th floor. I think Malcolm Wallace is on the 6th floor. That's why he leaves a fingerprint there. Ties Lyndon Johnson indelibly to this crime, because Wallace's connections to Johnson are indisputable based on the newspaper clippings of the day and the public record.
Tell us about Malcolm Wallace.
Malcolm Wallace is a leader at the student body in Texas. He has a succession of patronage jobs, including the Agriculture Department, arranged for him by Senator and later Vice President Johnson. In 1951, he shoots a man in cold blood named John Kinzer. Kinzer is involved intimately with Johnson's bohemian, bisexual party girl sister in Austin. It's an embarrassment to Johnson. Kinzer tries to blackmail Johnson or demands money in the form of a quote-unquote loan. It won't stop. Mac Wallace shoots Kinzer in cold blood in broad daylight in front of witnesses. He is apprehended. He tells the arresting officer, "You can't arrest me. I have to get back to Washington. I work for Senator Johnson."
Another question from another question from a listener, Roger. Why Dallas? If Johnson was going to have Kennedy killed, why would he do it in his own backyard?
That's precisely why it is done in Dallas, because Lyndon Johnson controls the Dallas Police Department. He controls the Dallas County Sheriff's Office, and he controls the Dallas County Prosecutor. His man, Cliff Carter, a White House aide, has given them all instructions from Johnson. Carter calls the district attorney and says, we want you to indict this Oswald fella for murder, a state charge, but not conspiracy, a federal charge. That keeps the investigation in Texas with state officials. Johnson's in full control. The police chief never leaves Johnson's side for the entire time in the aftermath of the assassination. He's joined at the hip, taking directions from Lyndon Johnson. So Johnson's political control is total. It is Johnson who insists that Kennedy go to Texas. It is Johnson who insists through John Connally, the governor, his protege, who insists on the drive through Dealey Plaza. It is Johnson who gets FBI Director John Rowley his first political job in 1938. Rowley is a Johnson man. Explains why the Secret Service lays down on John Kennedy, why they violate so many of their regular procedures.
How in the world has this been kept under wraps for 50 years?
Well, one of the main reasons, of course, is the large number of witnesses who have died untimely deaths. It defies the mathematical odds. 71 people connected to this case have died mysteriously. It's just not possible, given about 1,500 serious witnesses or those with information. When 3 FBI agents are called to testify before the House Select Committee on assassinations, all 3 die mysteriously very quickly. So for those who say, oh, someone would have talked, not if you killed them, they don't. Dead men tell no tale.
Bruce in New Iberia. Bruce, you're on the air with Roger Stone. Hi, Bruce.
Hello. I have a quick question for your guest, and I'll take my answer off the air. I wonder whether he believes that historians like Robert Caro and Doris Kearns Goodwin are also in on the cover-up, and if so, why? Thank you.
I appreciate that question. How does Robert Caro produce 4 volumes and not mention Billy Sol Estes? Not once. Look in the index. His name never appears. The Billy Sol Estes corruption case got more coverage at the time in column inches than the Bobby Baker scandal. It was a much, much bigger scandal because Billy Sol was so flamboyant. But Robert Caro never mentions that. The reason he does not is because Billy Sol never testifies against Johnson, goes to prison. When he gets out, he goes to the grand jury and he accuses Johnson of murder, multiple murders, including that of JFK. He also writes a letter to the Justice Department saying the same thing. It's produced in my book. Well, Caro would have to therefore connect Johnson to the murder. He just doesn't want to go there. So he never mentions him. He never mentions Mac Wallace. He never interviewed Billy Sol. He never interviewed Mac Wallace. He never investigated Mac Wallace. He never interviewed Madeline Duncan Brown, Johnson's mistress of 21 years. She is the one who, in my book, says that Johnson told her the night before the assassination, after tomorrow I won't have to deal with those Kennedy SOBs no more. The following morning, Johnson says to her, those Irish mafia bastards will never humiliate me again. That's his morning quote. Mm-hmm. And on New Year's Eve, 1964, she asks him in the Driscoll Hotel, where she says they have a suite. The vice president has a suite. She says to Johnson, some people say you were in on the assassination. He says, it wasn't me. It was the CIA and those crazy oil bastards. Well, he's their boy. He only left one person out of that equation.
Another listener asks about Arlen Specter, the former U.S. Senator who was the Warren Commission counsel. What was his involvement in this case?
Arlen Specter was a very good friend of mine, and we were close for a number of years. I learned a lot of shocking things after his death that are in this book that I feel duty-bound to report. But Arlen Specter was a very tough, very aggressive, very ambitious, very creative prosecutor. In my opinion, he was carrying out the marching orders of J. Edgar Hoover, but more precisely Allen Dulles and Earl Warren, to button this up. They were set to do so when they learned about the 4th bullet that hit the curb and bounced up, and a fragment of the bullet or cement cut a man named James Tague. the fact that there was a bullet is indisputable, and therefore that bullet has to be accounted for. That caused Arlen Specter to come up with his famous single bullet theory. Did he believe it? Yeah, he hypnotized himself into believing it. I argued with him, usually over martinis, and he never gave an inch, not an inch. And, of course, he had his trademark arrogance about it. I think he was just an establishment guy doing the establishment's bidding. He had very sharp elbows, and he was a real competitor. People say, and he became a U.S. Senator. Well, yes and no. He went back to Philadelphia. He ran for district attorney, and he won. Then he ran for mayor. He lost. Then he ran for governor. He lost. Then he ran for the U.S. Senate. He lost. And then he ran for the U.S. Senate again, and he won. Gives you some idea of how dogged an individual he was. Well, I think we should declassify thousands of documents and secrets the government's still withholding about this case. If it's so open and shut, and that Oswald did it and he had no conspirators, then why is there a need to seal anything? So I think that is suspicious, and I think that might contribute to a furthermore conclusion. The mainstream media attempts to ignore my book, some of them. I think it just follows an agenda, a mainstream media agenda to brand anybody who comes up with criticism of the government's conclusions as a kook or a nut or worse. I'm none of those things. I'm not a conspiracy guy. I'm a political realist. I've been in this business 40 years. I'm fully familiar with all Dick Nixon's warts, I assure you. My book is, it's not a partisan screed. Yes, LBJ happens to be a Democrat, JFK happens to be a Democrat, but a lot of criticism in there of George Bush and Gerald Ford and Arlen Specter and others.
Well, we thank you for joining us today. Always interesting. Roger Stone. Thank you, Roger.
Jim, great to be with you. Many, many thanks.
Good to talk with you. Let's do so soon again.